The grand chamber of the Galactic Council shimmered with the glow of artificial stars, an opulent display of technological superiority. Seated in a semicircle of gilded thrones were representatives of the most dominant species in the known galaxy. Their elongated forms, multi-limbed bodies, and bioluminescent carapaces made the lone human presence at the center of the room appear all the more insignificant. Ambassador Elias Vance stood rigid, his expression carefully neutral as the council's laughter echoed through the hall. It was not the mirth of camaraderie, but the derision of an emperor watching a jester's fumbling performance. The creatures called themselves warriors, scoffed High Chancellor Orvax, his scaled visage twisting into something akin to amusement. They bleed so easily. Their bones snap under pressure. Their bodies rot within mere decades. He turned to the others. And yet, they request a seat among us? Another representative, an insectoid diplomat from the Jacquard Dominion, clacked his mandibles. Curious, indeed. Their soldiers rely on primitive exosuits instead of natural armor. Their weapons, inefficient chemical projectiles, hardly capable of breaching standard combat plating. I fail to see why we continue this conversation. A third voice, belonging to a Vishari noble whose gelatinous form shimmered beneath the council's light, rippled with condescension. Perhaps they seek to amuse us. The last cycle's campaign against the Gorvax proved enlightening. Thousands of human combatants deployed, and yet their losses were staggering. They fight, yes, but so do cornered vermin. Tell me, Ambassador Vance, is this the future of your people? To die scrambling for a place you will never earn. Vance's fingers curled into a fist at his side. He had spent years tempering himself for moments like this, enduring their insults with the patience of a diplomat. But it was becoming harder. Humanity had fought, had bled, and yet here they stood, ridiculed, belittled, dismissed. Before he could formulate a response, the chamber's doors hissed open. Heavy boots struck the marble floor with a deliberate rhythm. The council's laughter faded, curiosity replacing mockery as a lone figure stepped into the hall. General Alexander Graves was not a tall man by human standards, but in that moment he might as well have been a colossus. His presence was not sculpted from alien physiology or genetic perfection, but from the hardened steel of experience. His uniform, a stark black combat jacket adorned with the insignia of a retired Special Forces officer, seemed almost defiant in its simplicity. He walked with the measured confidence of a man who had seen war in its rawest form and had not flinched. Vance's eyes widened, momentarily losing composure. This was not protocol. Graves had not been invited, nor was he meant to be here. The general stopped beside the ambassador, his gaze sweeping the assembly with the cold calculation of a battlefield commander surveying a landscape. When he spoke, his voice carried none of the flourish or diplomatic finesse of his counterpart. It was steady, unyielding. You talk about human weakness. His eyes locked onto Orvax, then the Jacquard diplomat, and finally the Vishari noble. You sit in your gilded towers, watch the outcomes of your wars from safe distances, and decide which species live or die based on the strength of their armor, the length of their lifespan, the sharpness of their claws. He took a step forward, his words measured. And yet, for all your power, for all your superiority, you misunderstand the very nature of war. The chamber remained silent. Graves let the moment stretch, then continued. You mock human endurance because you do not know what it means to endure. You call us fragile. Yet you have never seen a soldier push forward with 3 broken ribs, lungs burning, because a man beside him still needs covering fire. You call us short-lived. Yet you have never watched a father fight with everything he is because he knows his son will inherit whatever battlefield he fails to win. He paced slowly, eyes never breaking contact. You call us primitive because we fight wars differently. We do not rely on plated hides or genetic modifications. We do not regrow lost limbs or calcify our wounds in seconds. We survive because we refuse to surrender. And when you mistake that for weakness, you make the gravest error of all. Oravax's scaled brow furrowed, his amusement dimming. You claim much, human. But claims do not change the tide of war. Graves tilted his head slightly. No, but actions do. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken intent. Vance exhaled, regaining his composure. The general speaks for many of us. We did not come here to beg for a seat at your table. We came to remind you that underestimation has consequences. The same men you send to die in your proxy wars are watching, learning, adapting. Dismiss us if you wish, but mark my words. When the next war comes, you will remember this moment, and you will wonder why you ever thought we were weak. For the first time in the Council's history, no one laughed. The war room was dimly lit, its walls lined with holoscreens displaying shifting battlefield projections. Streams of data flickered in shades of blue and red, detailing planetary strongholds, enemy fleet movements, and casualty reports. The air was thick with the scent of burnt coffee and old sweat, a testament to the hours spent strategizing over a conflict humanity was never meant to win. General Alexander Graves stood at the center of it all, arms crossed, his expression carved from stone. The weight of expectation pressed against his shoulders, though he bore it without complaint. Across from him, a small group of officers, hardened men, all of them, watched in silence, waiting for him to speak. Colonel Nathan Briggs, a towering figure with a scar running from temple to jaw, finally broke the stillness. Council's orders are clear. We're to deploy to Dravas, 9 in 2 weeks. Forward Command expects heavy losses. He scoffed. Of course they do. They're throwing us in like fodder. Graves didn't move, didn't even blink. That's because they don't expect us to come back. A ripple of unease passed through the men. They all knew it was true. The Galactic Council had never hidden its disdain for humanity, and the assignment to Dravas, 9 was little more than a death sentence. The Gorvax Empire, a species engineered for war, had held the planet for years. No other force had successfully dislodged them. Major Elias Carter, younger than the others but just as seasoned, exhaled sharply. Then why send us at all? If they want us gone, they could just cut our supplies, strip our funding. Why the spectacles? Because they want to prove a point, Graves said. His voice was quiet, but it cut through the room with the precision of a blade. They want to show the rest of the galaxy what happens when a species oversteps its place. If we fail, when we fail, it won't just be a loss. It'll be a demonstration. He let the words settle before adding, That's why we're not going to fail. Briggs frowned. You're talking like we have a choice. Graves turned to the nearest holoscreen, tapping a command into the console. The display shifted, revealing a map of Dravas 9's surface. Fortifications, supply lines, and strategic weak points flashed into focus. I've been studying Gorvax tactics for years, Graves said. They fight like a hammer, direct, overwhelming, crushing force. They don't anticipate resistance from a weaker enemy. They don't plan for unpredictability. He met each of their eyes in turn. That's where we win. Carter leaned forward, intrigued despite himself. What are you suggesting? A different kind of war, Graves replied. We don't fight their way. We don't meet them head on. We hit them where it hurts, when they least expect it. We make them fear what they don't understand. Briggs grunted. Guerrilla warfare. Sabotage. Disruption. More than that, Graves said. Psychological warfare. Deception. We turn their strength against them. He gestured toward the screen. The Gorvax operate on rigid command structures. Cut off a leader, and the lower ranks hesitate. Disrupt their communications, and they lose cohesion. Make them doubt their own security, and they'll start second-guessing every move. Silence stretched across the room. Then Carter gave a slow nod. You think we can make them afraid of us? I think we can make them afraid of what they don't see, Graves corrected. We plant misinformation, strike in places they believe untouchable, make them hear whispers of ghosts in the dark. His voice was steel. And when the time comes, We remind them that underestimating humanity was the last mistake they ever made. The others exchanged glances. It was madness. It was impossible. And yet, Briggs exhaled, shaking his head. Hell, if we're going to die, we might as well make it hurt. Carter grinned, a wolfish expression. I'm in. Graves gave a single nod. The plan was in motion. The war had already begun. The sky above Dravis 9 burned. Jagged streaks of plasma fire cut through the dark clouds, illuminating the battlefield in brief, violent flashes. The ground trembled under the relentless barrage of artillery as the Gorvax war machine pressed forward, confident in its inevitable victory. Their forces moved with mechanical precision, armored behemoths marching in synchronized formations, their chitinous exoskeletons reflecting the hellish glow of the war-torn landscape. But something was wrong. General Alexander Graves crouched low in the ruins of a collapsed watchtower, his rifle braced against a slab of shattered ferrocrete. Through the scope, he watched as a Gorvax battalion hesitated at the edge of the valley. They were expecting resistance, expecting the human forces to stand in formation, to engage in a futile last stand. But the battlefield was empty. Major Elias Carter's voice crackled through Graves' earpiece. They're stalling. They're uncertain. Graves corrected. They don't understand the silence. To the Gorvax, battle was a matter of brute force. A straightforward clash of strength, where the superior force crushed the inferior. But Graves had refused to give them that battle. Instead, he had given them ghosts. For the last 3 days, the enemy had marched into ambush after ambush. Supply convoys had vanished without a trace. Forward command posts had been reduced to smoking craters. Snipers had picked off officers in broad daylight, only for their killers to disappear like wraiths. The Gorvax weren't fighting an army. They were fighting shadows. A voice, deeper and more guttural than Carter's, cut into the channel. Colonel Nathan Briggs. They're regrouping. Looks like command's finally getting tired of playing cat and mouse. Graves adjusted his position, scanning the enemy ranks. A second wave was moving in, heavier infantry with mechanized support. The Gorvax were done with caution. They were preparing to sweep the valley, to flush out whatever phantom force had been tormenting them. Graves exhaled. Good. Let them come. He keyed his mic to the broader team. Phase 3. Fire at will. The first explosion rippled through the valley before the Gorvax realized they were standing in a kill zone. The charges had been buried beneath the dirt, carefully placed along their anticipated path. The ground itself roared as fire and shrapnel tore through the enemy ranks, sending armored warriors tumbling like broken dolls. Then came the gunfire. From the ridgelines, from the ruins, from unseen alcoves within the rock formations, human soldiers unleashed a hail of bullets and energy rounds, cutting into the disoriented Gorvax. They scrambled for cover, but there was none. Carter's squad struck first, emerging from a concealed trench with ruthless efficiency. Silenced rifles barked in rapid succession, sending enemy commanders crumpling before they could issue orders. Briggs' heavy gunners followed suit, cutting down advancing lines with controlled bursts of plasma fire. The Gorvax had walked into a slaughterhouse. Graves lined up a shot. His crosshairs settled on a towering brute clad in ceremonial battle plating, the insignia of a field general etched into the metal. The shot cracked across the battlefield, and the Gorvax leader's head snapped back, his body collapsing into the dirt. The enemy wavered. For the first time, the Gorvax hesitated mid-charge. Confusion rippled through their ranks, uncertainty gnawing at their rigid doctrine. This was not how war was fought, not against lesser beings. Briggs' voice came through, strained but triumphant. They're breaking. Graves watched as the first units began falling back, retreating toward what remained of their stronghold. They had come expecting an easy victory. They had found something else entirely. Press them, he ordered. No mercy. The battlefield was no longer theirs. It belonged to the ghosts. Smoke curled into the sky, a thick, acrid veil over the battlefield. The Gorvak's forces were retreating, but Graves knew better than to celebrate. They weren't broken, not yet. Their doctrine didn't allow for surrender. They were regrouping, recalculating, adapting, and that made them dangerous. Graves knelt beside a fallen soldier, pressing 2 fingers against the man's throat. No pulse. Another good man lost. He exhaled sharply, rising to his feet as Carter approached, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Blood streaked the younger man's face, though it wasn't his own. "They're digging in," Carter reported. "Fell back to their main compound. No sign of pursuit, but they're reinforcing." Graves expected as much. The Gorvaks were prideful, but they weren't fools. After the devastation they had suffered, they wouldn't risk another reckless assault. No! They would fortify and force the humans into the kind of battle they were ill-equipped to win, a direct siege. Briggs stalked over, his expression dark. "We can't take M in a stand-up fight. Even wounded, they outgun us. And if reinforcements show up," he shook his head, "we'll be wiped out." Graves studied the holographic map projected from his wrist console. The Gorvak stronghold sat atop a cliffside, surrounded by layered defenses. A frontal assault would be suicide. They needed another way in. His eyes narrowed. There, on the western ridge, a supply tunnel, likely used for moving equipment in and out of the compound. If they could get inside, they wouldn't have to fight an army. They would only need to cripple its heart. "We go in quiet," Graves said. "Hit them from the inside before they can regroup." Briggs frowned. "And if they've sealed the tunnels, then we make a new entrance." Carter smirked. "I like it." They moved at dusk. The team was down to 23 men, 23 against hundreds. But numbers had never been their advantage. They reached the tunnel entrance under cover of darkness, the jagged rocks providing just enough concealment. A single Gorvak sentry stood guard, shifting uneasily. Graves lifted his knife. One quick movement, a silent death. The sentry crumpled. Briggs dragged the body aside, muttering, "Still don't like this." "Noted," Graves murmured, leading the way inside. The tunnel stretched into darkness, the air thick with damp earth and the metallic scent of machinery. Footsteps echoed softly as they moved, weapons raised, eyes sharp. Minutes stretched into eternity. Then voices. Graves raised a fist, signaling a stop. Ahead, a pair of Gorvak's engineers worked near a junction, oblivious to their approach. A single shot from Carter's suppressed rifle dropped the first. The second barely had time to register before Briggs ended him with a blade to the throat. They pressed forward. The tunnel widened into a storage depot, crates stacked high with munitions and supplies. More importantly, it housed a power relay station, one that controlled the base's defenses. Graves turned to Carter. "You're up." The major grinned, setting to work. Explosives planted, wires connected. Minutes later, the charges were set. Briggs exhaled. "Hope this works." "It will." Graves keyed his mic, everyone in position. Affirmative responses came through. The rest of the team had infiltrated the outer perimeter, waiting for the signal. Graves nodded to Carter. "Do it." The explosion was immediate, a violent tremor that shook the compound. Alarms blared as the power grid failed, plunging the fortress into chaos. Then the killing began. Human soldiers struck from the shadows, cutting down panicked Gorvaks before they could mount a defense. Graves moved like a phantom, his rifle spitting fire, each shot precise, lethal. The tide was turning, but the battle was far from over. The fortress burned. What had once been an impenetrable Gorvak's stronghold was now a graveyard of twisted metal and smoldering wreckage. Explosions still echoed through the valley as secondary charges detonated, gutting the last of the enemy's supply depots. The ground was littered with the bodies of fallen warriors, both human and alien. General Graves stood at the center of it all, rifle lowered, his breath steady despite the chaos around him. The battle had been won, but victory came at a price. They had lost good men. 23 had gone in. Less than half remained. Carter limped over, his left arm bloodied, but his expression triumphant. They're in full retreat. Whatever command structure they had is gone. They're done. Briggs sat on the edge of a collapsed wall, reloading his weapon out of habit. They won't forget this, he muttered. The Gorvaks don't take humiliation lightly. Graves knew that all too well. This battle hadn't just been about survival. It had been a message. Humanity was not to be discarded, not to be mocked, not to be underestimated. The Galactic Council had sent them here to fail, expecting a swift and brutal lesson in humanity's insignificance. Instead, they had rewritten the script. The Council would hear of this, and so would every species that had ever doubted them. A distant rumble cut through the air. Above, the skies shimmered as a new fleet entered the system. For a moment, Graves tensed. Was it Gorvak's reinforcements? Another death sentence? Then his radio crackled. A familiar voice. Allied Command. General Graves, we've received your transmission. The Council has issued a ceasefire order. The war is over. Silence fell over the remaining men. Some exhaled in relief. Others simply stared, as if struggling to comprehend that it was truly over. Carter let out a short laugh. You mean we actually did it? Graves allowed himself the smallest of smiles. We did. Briggs shook his head, chuckling bitterly. They sent us here to die. Now, they'll have to call us heroes. The irony wasn't lost on any of them. The Galactic Council had ridiculed humanity, dismissed them as weak. But weakness had not won this war. Adaptability had. Resilience had. The very traits the Council had mocked were what had turned the tide. Graves turned his gaze skyward, watching the distant ships descend. Humanity had earned its place in the stars, not through the Council's mercy, but through fire and blood. And the galaxy would never look at them the same way again.